As we improve in chess, we start looking at positions on the board a little differently. Of course, we need to calculate more quickly and more deeply, but we also kind of need to scan for and look for sort of deeper concepts. Things like pawn structure and tactical motifs and piece activity and those sorts of things. And in today's game, there are a couple of good examples of sort of these slightly deeper concepts that I either missed or didn't take seriously enough. In the first case, I kind of completely missed it, and it made me miss sort of a non-obvious threat that ended up causing me some trouble a little bit later. And in the second case, it actually caused me to completely lose the game. And it's worth taking note of these things when you're analyzing your own games so that you can see kind of what you missed and maybe why you missed it, and have a better chance of noticing it and not making the same mistake in a future game. So let's dive in and have a look. This is a game I played recently at Chess Club against a very strong opponent, and I played the Grand Prix attack as white against the Sicilian defense, and this is kind of a main line. And it turns out, instead of f4 here, which is what I played, just an interesting side note, apparently knight f3 is a much better line than after the trade here, and black does something like d6, then a plan like d4 for white seems like a good plan, I guess. I think maybe after capturing here, like the queen could capture, maybe you could bring the knight back, I'm not really sure. I should probably study that, because I've been hit with this sort of main line of, I guess back here, putting the knight on d4, and I'm typically okay with, trading off that bishop, because usually I'm going to end up with a lot of pawns on light squares anyway, but maybe studying this variation would be handy. I should probably do that. But anyway, I played f4 and it was perfectly fine. We made that trade, and I brought out my knight, which is very thematic and typical for this sort of position. And then after bishop d7, I move my knight back, and I push my pawn to d3, again, very common, and get castled. So in this position, I wasn't totally sure what the right plan was, but the very thematic plan in the Grand Prix is to bring the queen out to the G file, especially if it looks like black is going to castle this way. And then I can push the F pawn, bring the bishop, and just try to launch a kingside attack, right? So I thought for a little bit, and then I decided, yeah, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's see what happens. Often it's more effective against like a fianchettoed setup, because then, this F5 push is, I don't know, maybe just packs a little more of a punch. But in any case, this is the way I went, and we continued on. I guess actually looking at the engine later, I'm just remembering this. E5 is kind of an interesting idea in this position and for the next couple of moves as well. And the engine kind of likes this because it sort of starts to break things up. It kind of forces this knight to make a decision on where it's going to go. We're actually going to look a little bit at E5 in a couple of moves, but apparently it would have been possible in this position as well. But anyway, I played Queen E1, black castled, and I played Queen G3. Black played b5, just kind of expanding over on this side of the board. And now this is where I made my first mistake. We're not going to talk too much about this one, but I played f5 because f5 is very thematic of this sort of kingside attack in the Grand Prix. But it doesn't work in this case, because what I'm trying to do is put the bishop here and attack the G pawn. And a common defense is to put the knight on h5. And what I didn't really realize is, after black captures here, and then even if we trade and black has the bishop here, either way, this square is not available for my queen. And so I'll just show you what that looks like. Like after that capture, and I put my bishop here, and the knight goes to h5. I had been thinking, from here that it was going to work out that my queen could then go to this square and attack this knight. But of course the pawn is defending, and even if the pawn wasn't, then the bishop would have. So that was just a mistake on my part. And this is where the game kind of tilted in black's favor, and I wasn't doing so well as white, but I still defended pretty well. And this isn't where like my really big mistakes came in. So I put the queen on h3. I think I did quite a bit of calculation and found that I wasn't going to be like way down on material, because it looks like, everything, like not that everything's hanging, but the bishop is hanging, and this pawn can capture here, which is a discovered attack on my queen, which also attacks my knight. But then this knight is also hanging. And it all just kind of worked out after this capture and this capture. The thing is, black doesn't really want to capture here. I mean, it's fine material-wise, but it would be better to capture here because that doesn't open up the king. Anyway, so that's what happened. I got the bishop out of there. This bishop comes down here, and I capture here. So after the sequence, I'm down a pawn. So not so bad. I'm down a pawn. But also my king is opened up. And this is going to come into play a little bit later. This is always always makes things just a little bit more dangerous, right? So then black played bishop f6. I moved the rook over just because I wanted to put this knight somewhere like here, and I didn't want to drop that pawn. So g6, which chases my queen away, and in some positions that would actually open up some danger on these dark squares, but this bishop is here and is just going to tuck back onto g7 as if it was fianchettoed from the first place, which is interesting, and black's position is quite solid. So moved my queen to h3. Queen d7. I had the option to trade queens, and the engine actually likes trading queens here for some reason. I didn't look deeply into this, but I didn't want to trade queens just on principle because I'm the one who's down material, so I want to keep pieces on the board if I can. And so instead, I played queen g2. Now, this is the first concept that I want to mention. Queen g2 lines up my queen and my king. And right now, it looks like, so what? Who cares that my queen and king are lined up? Like, yes, I suppose if a rook could magically teleport to g5, then that would be a big problem, right? But a rook obviously can't do that. But this is the kind of thing to look at and say, all right, is this something dangerous right now? No? Okay, good. But let's keep it in mind because it could become dangerous later. And this is where I made a bit of a mistake here because, to be honest, I didn't even see this danger. I don't know, like my brain just completely dismissed it. It's like I didn't even sort of have in the back of my head, oh, remember that my queen and king are lined up, so that could become dangerous later. Just didn't even think about it, didn't even worry about it, and the reason I'm telling you this is because obviously it comes into play a little bit later in the game. So we continued on, bishop g7, I brought out the knight, and then the queen, I put the queen up here, so still the queen is lined up against the king, and I was just going up to try to attack this pawn or something like that. But once again, I'm not recognizing whatsoever this kind of danger. So then black takes the knight, so getting rid of this threat that I was trying to put together. It turns out that taking with the d pawn would have also been maybe interesting and would have allowed me to try to maybe push up here and cause some issues, but I just wanted to keep my pawn structure solid. I felt like, if anything, I was the one fairly behind in this game, and so I didn't want to just do anything too weird. I wanted to keep things pretty solid. Right, I think actually taking with this pawn meant that I could potentially put a rook on this file and keep attacking this backwards pawn. So that's an interesting thing to note. It's not what I did, but it's an interesting thing to think about anyway. So then d5, I ended up pushing instead of trading because I didn't want to just open up this file. And I felt like I could probably at some point manage the c3 push and the d4 push and kind of solidify my pawn chain on the dark squares, which would kind of blunt this bishop. And it turned out doing that, like making these pushes ended up being more difficult. I didn't successfully get them in, but it seemed like I probably could have. So then black, started attacking this pawn naturally. I defended it with bishop f4, and then black played rook c6. And to be honest, when I saw this, I didn't entirely understand this move. But I figured, I was really focused on this pawn. I figured black was trying to put this rook here and just add another attacker to this pawn, right? But if you remember what we talked about a few moves ago, my queen and my king are still lined up. And this rook is now one step closer to potentially coming over onto the g file here. And this actually creates an attack, which we'll see on the next move. So I moved this rook over, just adding, like prophylactically adding another defender to this pawn because I feel like these rooks are going to line up. And then black played g5. And it wasn't until this move, actually, that I realized the danger of the queen and the king being both on the g file, because he made this move and I was like, well, can't I just take? Like, can't I just take with the bishop or with the queen? But of course, once I capture, then the rook comes over here. And now in this variation, like it's even clearer if I take with the queen. Like if I take with the queen, then of course this just loses my queen, right? Whereas if I take with the bishop, now this is pinned and something like h6 is coming later and I'm going to lose material here. So it's still, it's still defensible at this point. I haven't lost, but it's just interesting that I had completely missed that this was even a possible issue, right? And this is kind of one of the lessons I'm taking away from this game is whenever there's some kind of danger like this, there's some there are different types, like it could be the queen and the king lined up on a file or a rank or a diagonal or something that could be attacked. It could be two pieces that are I don't know, say this king and this rook, which could be forked by a knight potentially. Obviously, that's not going to happen in this game because black doesn't have any knights. But these sorts of things, we sort of have to just kind of keep those in the back of our heads as we're calculating and as we're moving and as we're making plans, right? Because even if it's not an immediate danger, it could become a danger in the future. So anyway, I obviously did not capture this pawn. I moved the bishop out of the way instead. And then, of course, black puts the rook here, which is what I was, worried about. And now what I did is I kind of made my next mistake. This next move itself is not necessarily a mistake, but I put the rook on f5. And I did that to add another defender to this pawn because I'm just so laser focused on this pawn. I probably shouldn't have worried about it quite as much as I did. I don't know. But it does feel like it's a pretty important pawn. So probably, defending it was the right thing to do. However, as you may have noticed, and as I actually did notice in the game, this sets up potentially a discovered attack from the queen. And I decided to do it anyway because I didn't see how that discovered attack was going to actually be dangerous. Now, my rook is undefended, so there is that, but I didn't see a way that this rook could move out of the way somewhere and cause enough danger that this rook was going to be in trouble, right? And so I felt like this was probably safe, and it was at this point. But then on the next move, black pushed f6. And here, I think what happened, I may have been low on time, but I don't think I can blame it on that. I don't think I was that low on time. I think what happened here is, again, I was so laser focused on this pawn that I'm like, hey, I can solve the problem of this pawn now because I can simply trade it off, right? I can just capture here. But then, and this is what I did, and I labeled this as a blunder because now this rook can indeed make a move that makes this discovered attack very powerful. This rook can capture here. And I had looked and seen this rook is adequately defended for, defending against these rooks coming down this file. But the problem is after this move, and of course it comes with a check, now I capture the rook, but this discovered attack means that my rook is simply hanging. And after queen takes f5, this is where I resigned. And once again, it kind of comes down to me not taking this concept seriously. I did see the fact that the queen had a potential discovered attack on the rook, but I just didn't take it seriously. I was just like, yeah, I don't think that it's a danger right away, and so I think I can ignore it for now. And, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes we can ignore these things, but in this case, I needed to, calculate at this point, okay, if this pawn were to move and it opens up this file, then all right, remember that discovered attack that I had seen, a couple moves ago, or one move ago, in fact? Let's just do our calculations and make sure that's not going to be a problem now, right? Just because it wasn't a problem before doesn't mean it's never going to be a problem. And so we need to keep this thing in mind and shape our calculations such that we can take it into account, if that makes sense. And so I just thought this was kind of interesting because it kind of showcases two concepts, like the queen and the king being lined up for a potential pin and a discovered attack from the queen. Two concepts that are not that they're super advanced, but they're a little more advanced than just seeing whether a piece is hanging and can be captured and that sort of thing, right? And they're also concepts that, when they occurred in the game, they weren't actually dangerous right away, but it was the kind of thing that because they could be dangerous later, they needed to be kind of in the back of my mind. And of course, in the first case, it wasn't in the back of my mind at all. I completely missed it. I think my brain just kind of filtered it out because it seemed so far-fetched that anything could possibly get down onto that G file. And then in the second case, I just, because it was safe in that instance and I had other things on my mind, I just prioritized the other things, like trying to defend that pawn or deal with that pawn somehow, and just figured, that discovered attack, it's not a problem. I can focus on something else. And so I just think that's the kind of thing that we should watch out for and review when we look at our games, right? Make sure that we're always learning something and always seeing where some of those maybe blind spots are that we don't see during our games, and perhaps it can help us not to make that mistake in the future. So thank you for watching. If you learned something or found this interesting, make sure to like and subscribe, and also leave a comment if you have run into issues like this in your games, and maybe let me know what your strategy is for avoiding these kinds of mistakes. Have a good one, and I'll see you on the next video.